the images that you brought, because like I've had many questions, about like what drives you and because you really carved a very unique path. I mean, more
Well,
so than
Yeah,
well,
like you haven't.
well, but I was more of an asshole about it. Although it's like I don't. There were maybe years where I didn't know you that.
Look inside here.
That's right. Well, but there's you do the whimsy and the beauty and the like sort of the magic that you do. It's like there's a pastoral quality to your work, but like when you kick in the drama, it's incredibly unsettling. Do you get that response from
A lot of people. It was really interesting. I grew up reading Edgar Rice Burroughs and reading Conan the Barbarian, and when I first moved to New York, and I would complain to my roommate Michael Kaluta that I didn't have any work and all I could do was sit around and do paintings I wanted to do, and he just started laughing, going, "Just remember you said that, Charles."
That's so, my God,
But I would be trying to do Conan the Barbarian pictures, or these things, and it took a few years to realize that is just, I don't have any pulp sensibility in my body or in my thoughts. And you have to be aware of what you really want to paint and what you don't want to paint, and sometimes you need to stretch a little. But when I did my Spider-Man graphic novel, which I've been working in Marvel for a long time, and finally some editor said, "Charles, you really, really need to do a major character." So I picked Spider-Man because I loved him when I was a kid. I did gymnastics in school because I love Spider-Man. And then you're in New York and you're going, "God, look at that architecture.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be so cool to get up there?" So that was easy, and it was one person. But I still have to do, your superhero, usually the plot is going to be decided by who has the biggest fist and hands and arms. And I did it, and I only had to do it once. And it was something I never wanted to do again because I don't really think in that kind of terms in life. And I didn't want to be a proponent of that as, continue. I just can't imagine doing month after month, bam, 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 bam.
Yes.
things.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I mean, yeah, it's funny that when, like, we grew up loving the medium and we love the form and we love the characters and stuff, and then once you start doing it, there does come a point. Like, I found that as I was working on Moon Knight, as I got toward when I was breaking out of the whole Neil Adams clonery period, where I was more interested in telling emotional stories or whatever that had like psychological stories or veering into other arenas, and it was almost like comics became the place to sort of like Trojan horse some of that stuff into it. And so it just so happened that to have a character, like I remember on issue 26, which was I think Hit It, like it was just panels of like tenement buildings with crooked bricks and stuff, just like all of this abstract expression and stuff. And then at the very last page, it's like, oh yeah, that I put Midnight in,
Yeah.
But there is something to be said about your sensibility of having month after month of punch outs and like escalating war of armament.
I'm stronger now.
Yeah,
I'm really strong.
Yeah,
no,
right.
I'm really, really
I've
strong.
got this bigger gun, and it's like, and it's to me, I found, I was actually with Elektra, I found that I had to parody it,
Right.
because at a certain point, like that cover of Elektra 1 where she's standing in the high heels, I thought, I'm gonna give her more of a swimmer's physique as opposed to sort of pneumatic,
Right.
And then make her tall, thin, high heels with a gun that easily outweighs her 2-to-1. And I thought the whole thing was a parody of like the entire genre,
Right.
and somewhat poked. And now I look back at that cover and I go like, it's so quaint, it's so pulled back and restrained, And it's also, I think the sort of humor of it has kind of gotten lost. It's like it feels like it all of a sudden.
You can't
Yeah.
When the people say, "I'm going to do a parody of horror movies, and I'm going to have more blood than anyone. It's like,
yeah.
doesn't work.
Yeah.
But we were also that 1980s time, and Marvel was a perfect time to be there because everything was selling, and they just let you do stuff.
Yeah.
And there wasn't much control over what it was. So if you wanted to do something odd.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
That's very true. And I think a lot of people forget that, that a lot of that is absolutely possible because of the editorial, the people who in editorial, not necessarily even the bean counters or the people in the suits, but just the editors. Now, who was the editor on
Jim Salicrup, Archie Goodwin,
Oh,
Al
Archie,
Milgrom,
right.
which I keep trying to. I need to go see him.
Yeah.
But he did Marvel Fanfare. I sort of snuck in the back door of Marvel by doing work in Epic Illustrated, and then Al Milgrom asked me to do Marvel Fanfare, and then just by sheer chance I did
when I
some
first saw your work,
Spider-Man.
I remember because working with Archie, and it's like, and then when I saw your work in Epic, and then it was like I thought, wow, this is really cool fantasy guys, it's like because you just have had that fantasy element to it, and it was like, and I had thought that you came from a fantasy world, like the Tolkien and then sort of that, and that you were starting to do comics that you were like, I want to try and do some superhero stuff. It was almost like a real artist came into comics, It was that kind of
well, I remember one day walking down, there was this long hallway, and then there was a little jag at the Epic Illustrated, and there was a desk there. And I heard these people talking, and one of them this guy was saying, and this Charles Vess, how does he get jobs? Look at that art. And I turned around the corner, and there I was, hearing this, and it was Jim Starlin talking.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And he just sort of, big grin, sheepish grin. It was like, yeah, well, I mean, we don't share many sensibilities. So.
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, and I find that kind of, the fact that Starlin was in that, because I mean, I've never seen, it's like it's so completely like.
Yeah, it's
like
a different.
It's not even a square peg round
It's
hole.
Earth 1 and Earth 2.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's interesting, very interesting.
So there's pictures.
Oh yes, okay, great.
There's only 15 of them there.
Oh no, that's cool.
So yeah, why don't you? I'd love
This
to. This is gorgeous.
one of the things I like to do is do a painting. Wait a minute, let me do this so I won't kill your ears. Do a painting that has a narrative impulse, but is not connected to a story, any particular story. This is called Gathering the World, and what she's doing, the older woman, is taking all the elements of an old world and making a new one, and teaching the young girl that. And there's all these, my favorite animals are in there, including a Totoro somewhere. I'd have to have my laser pointer to show you that. But it's just for myself, but it's something I play with a lot, where there's no given story, so I'm hoping that as many viewers as look at that will make up their own story. So there'll be like hundreds of stories coming off this, and I think that would be really cool. And besides, it was fun to do.
Well, it's also, I mean, that whole idea of evoking that you've almost like, there's a snapshot of a very specific thing that you happen to be lucky enough to witness,
And it was, this was done entirely for myself, as is the next one.
Now, how large is that, the original?
24 by maybe 30.
Oh, okay. So-
They're big for me, but they're not that big.
Right, and well, except you've done some fairly large
Yes.
pieces, yeah. But
When I'm crazy enough.
now, are these now gallery pieces?
Sort of.
Okay.
They're just done for myself. This is actually, if you sit on my porch, that's the landscape you see, right
Wow.
past that.
Wow.
And every tree and flower and animal, and there's little mice, and there's bees, and there's all sorts of birds in that green man. All that's in my yard. The woman and the green man are not. But this is called The Summer King and His Bride of Flowers. And I did 4 seasons of the Green Man. This was a summer one. And again, it's just for myself. Next. This was a cover for the recent book called The Books of Earth Sea, which is 1,008 pages. It's almost 5 pounds. It has
Good.
56 illustrations in
Good
it.
God.
Took 4 years working on this
Now,
book.
is this watercolor?
It's the colored inks.
Colored inks,
It's
okay.
I use for everything I do. I use colored inks, and they look like watercolors, but they don't
Are they
act
the
like water.
FWs? Or?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah, I mean-
acrylic, and you water them down, dilute them, mix them,
Oh, I
smash
love
them.
them. I love them. They're not
Yeah.
easy to lift up, but
Yeah.
but
Yeah,
you're getting
no.
but certain kinds of almost the granulation and the color changes up in the
Yeah.
upper right
Now,
clouds.
all
That's
that-
something that yeah.
That is because this big whacking bunch of paper I bought from Strathmore does not have the sizing on it.
Oh, okay.
So it's like painting on blotter paper, and it goes bloop.
Yeah.
When you put the color down, and you either have to scream or you walk away and let it dry, and it gets a little bit flatter. But because of all those modulations, you can use those modulations and drop more color into it and get things that you would never think of otherwise. So it's
Yeah,
just-
no, that's
it's really fun.
and that's usually something that's quite controllable, and more so in watercolor.
Yeah.
But it's beautiful to see is that that you could actually get that effect, and also the color scheme. I love the muted.
Yeah. And I have no color. I don't. The colors just happen as I paint. With the inks, you can layer 15 or 20 coats of color down, so just keep changing them. So I don't really.
Right.
I didn't start out going, well, I want kind of thing. I knew I wanted that red dragon, but most of it just happened. The author, who I worked with for 4 years on this book, right before she passed away, but she called this my Tiepolo composition.
Oh, okay.
Which was fun. And and these are some really bizarre stuff now. Years ago, an architect asked me to design a 30 by 50 foot wall sculpture, and it's based on the Appalachian jacktails. This is a very much younger me. Go to next one, please.
Wow.
And so they were calling it brick sculpture, and I was going, what's that? And then they showed me a picture of what brick sculpture was, and I went, oh, that's a bas relief. And they said, what's that? So it was a different, and it was a brick artist that worked for this brick company, General Shale. And it's really huge, but I can't show you the whole thing because it's in there's a stairwell that goes up the middle of it, which makes it really close. You can see everything, but you can't get back and take one comprehensive picture of it. Although there's probably a way to do it digitally.
Or with a drone now.
Yeah, with a drone.
Yeah.
Next. I think another picture set of it.
That's
Yeah.
gorgeous.
So it's based on the Appalachian jacktails, and there's all sorts of stories
Now,
to it.
how did they decide in terms of the depth? I mean,
Well,
did you get
the guy that was doing it knew, you can't go too much, although on the bottom there's a pioneer woman, a jackrabbit, and a Native American guy telling stories, and they're almost three-dimensional, and they've had to replace the ears or the nose quite a few times,
Oh.
but people pull
Oh,
them
okay,
off.
yeah. Well, it's like going to some countries where there's like a statue with a toe and like
Yes.
brass, and it's like it's completely
Yes.
worn away from the touchstone.
Yes.
Yeah.
Someone told me that when you go to Verona, there's a statue of Romeo and Juliet, and she's up in the thing, and what is really shiny, meaning it's been rubbed and most, is her breasts.
Yeah.
You're like, okay.
How unheard of? How unusual. Yeah.
Just next. And this is a 16-foot bronze statue fountain that I spent 3 years doing. I designed it. I thought I would do a little bit of sculpture. Before this, I'd only ever done little tiny things that you sculpey that you popped in the oven and cooked.
Right,
And then I was working with this other artist that was a bit of a crook, and he also just would go down to Mexico where his family lived and just be away for a while. And the people that commissioned it go, well, we need this done, so I would sculpt it. So it became like 90% of this is my sculpting. And next.
Now,
And I poured the bronze and
wow,
everything.
that's fantastic.
Everything. So that's 16 feet high in the water.
Now, when you were sculpting, I mean, was this a maquette, and it was
Well, it
enlarged
was
by,
a
or
very
you
simple thing, and then I just sculpted it. She was 9 feet tall, metal armature, and then 1,000 pounds of clay.
Right, and now, was that done in a special location, or did you, I mean?
Wherever it would work. We had a little foundry up on a hill that used to be a garage. So I don't know if you know about bronze, but you sculpt it as a big bunch of clay. Then you take this really vile chemical stuff that's sort of rubber and sort of acrylic, and it becomes pieces like a three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle. And there are 104 pieces to this that you pulled off. So then you've got an imprint of it in this piece that's about that big. And then you pour wax on that, and you peel the wax off when it's dry. And then you start dipping it into even more vile chemical acrylic thing that's probably going to rot your brain out. And after a while, you've got this big enclosed thing with a little venting in it, and you put that in an oven and you melt the wax. It's a lost wax process. So you melt the wax out, and then you take it to the foundry. You rev up your oven to 2,000 degrees. You melt the bronze. You pour it in there. Let it dry. Then you crack that stuff off, and you've got the piece like that. So it goes on and on and on.
That's hence the 3 years.
Yeah, it was 3 years, and if the Stardust movie hadn't come out, which made the book sell really well, which meant that I had big royalty checks coming in for about 3 years, I wouldn't have had the time nor the money to be able to do this, because it really, the funding was not very good. But it's there, and it's going to be there for, I go past this next, there's a couple of these.
That's phenomenal.
That's a close-up of her face. So at this size, those roses were, we went to Hobby Lobby and bought plastic roses. That's what, I didn't have to sculpt the roses. It was great.
That's great. That's great.
So, and
you could have. I'm sorry. You could have. It was sort of why do I need to add like another two or 3 days to 3 years? Yeah, exactly.
Yes, 2 or 3 days for each rose, perhaps.
But, I can imagine.
Next. There's Puck is over there on the right, on the other side, holding up comedy, and Titania's holding tragedy, since it's for the theater, the State Theater of Virginia. And there's some foxes and a tortoise.
Now, was it when this did this get a proper unveiling?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah, it was really cool. And I have all these pictures of the town got really into it, and their workers would come in with this huge loader, and she was dangling in the air as she came over.
That must have been like, like talk about anxiety, Dad.
Yes. Because it was built so that the weight of her is not on that tree, the bronze tree. So, because that would just crumble it all. So it's all interconnected with these stainless steel tubes and things.
So it's all the illusion.
Yeah. Will it work? Will it work? You didn't know till you did it.
Right.
Next. It's one of the smaller fairies.
I'm curious what kind of upkeep they have to do on it. Like
every couple of years you have to wax it, or it just it'll do the green thing.
They oxidize to
yeah.
Right.
So and that's the theater right behind there. Even earlier than this, I designed the logo of the theater. They're the Barter Theater of Virginia, and it started in the 30s when you would nobody had any money, and they brought New York actors down to play, and people got paid by barter. They brought food and animals, and everybody but Bernard Shaw got paid in Virginia hams, but he was a vegetarian, so he got something else.
Funny, right?
So they're over there, but I bartered for the logo, and I can go to see every play they have for free, so it's great.
Nice.
Next. And this was a show I had at a museum, and I painted a narrative mural that was 12 feet high and 150 feet long. And this is to give you some scale. But it was really cool. I put artwork hanging from the ceiling in the center of this, And what happened, and I didn't even plan this, but the first time I walked in after we'd finished painting it, I realized that you were standing in the middle of the story. And that was really cool.
That's
So,
phenomenal.
and it was painted over at the end of the show, so it was up there for 4 months. And that was on purpose.
Right.
So it was sort of my gift to people that got there.
That's great. Now, when you did it, you actually, again, did you do it small and then enlarge it?
I did a long, real long
Right.
sketch.
Right.
That was only, it was 1 inch to 1 foot.
Got it.
kind of
Got it.
thing.
Now, did you do all the transferring up of size, or did you have?
I just drew it on the wall. But what we did was we took the lettering as vinyl, stick-on letter. So we looked at the sketch, figured out where the lettering is supposed to be, put it on the wall, and then that's what I used.
As
to
the
know
guide.
where.
Oh, okay.
Where's the tree? Where's
Right,
this?
yeah.
Where's that?
Got it. Okay.
And it was a very rough surface, so it immediately became a different, when you were painting it on the wall, because we were using paint from Walmart with,
Yeah, oh, sure, yeah.
all this stuff. And it just, you got to be very textural. It was really fun. It's like, oh, it does this.
Yeah.
You
Oh,
know?
yeah. Exactly. Yes.
So
That's beautiful.
And there's a couple of them. They're not very, because I hadn't thought about doing this until last night. So next, there's another. I was up on the ladder trying to finish these trees, and I heard this voice behind me. This was the night of the opening, going, Charles, there's people outside. It's going to start. So it was a much taller ladder than that. Next. So just some of the stuff.
Nice.
I recreated this in a book that I used to have copies of at my table, but it's gone now. It doesn't have quite the same effect when it's the size of a book, but next.
That's still, I mean, it really, and again, environmentally, I mean, there is that sense of being in the middle,
Yeah.
not only of the story, but like in the middle of this kind of woodland area.
Mhm.
It's like,
And I think there's one more. That's the end of my slideshow, the dragon.
that's great.
And it was really fun painting, instead of using your wrist or just from elbow down, you're using your entire body to do these gestures.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Where's this horn going? Kind of thing. Fun.
Yeah, it's almost like the stuff that we worry about in pen and ink at this size. It's like, if you were to blow it up to the similar size, it would be like very easy to correct, but at that size,
But
the littlest things don't matter as much.
have you seen that Lorenzo Matacchi, Hansel and Gretel?
I've seen
book?
Pinocchio. I don't think I've seen him.
It's black and white. It's a big brush,
Right,
and
right.
just these huge brush drawings, and it's
Right.
like the most gorgeous. You're in the deep woods possible.
Right.
It's really great.
Oh, well, he's so phenomenal.
Yeah.
This is terrific. Bravo.
So
Bravo.
that's-
That's great stuff.
That's
Yeah.
it. I was hoping that I was hoping someone would ask you to bring some slides too.
Well, nobody mentioned anything about it, and I think probably because I think this was supposed to be done on Friday.
Yes.
Yeah. So, and I think whatever was set up, because I was supposed to get in a day early, but I found out at the beginning of the week when I was in Kansas City that the Legion show was having its premiere in LA on
right.
Thursday, so I flew back for that.
And
Because
you're-
like Hollywood, man. Yeah. So yeah, but this is. I mean, again, because we haven't talked. I mean, what were some of your you mentioned? Because I was totally into Jules Verne and H.G. Wells, in the whole travel. What about visually? Who were some of your artistic influences? Because was it?
There would be Howard Pyle, American illustrator, Arthur Rackham, British illustrator, John Bauer, Swedish, same. They're all about the same time period, and mostly it's old dead guys and some really interesting women. There's a whole group of women artists that worked in Glasgow, Scotland, and They're called the Glasgow Girls only because there was a group of people, Rennie McIntosh and people who were called the Glasgow Boys, so they just did that.
Oh.
But they did these sort of secessionist, symbolist, gorgeous paintings that make me weep, going, I'll never do anything that good. These two, Frances McDonald and her sister, it's not coming to me, and Jesse M. King, a whole bunch of people that I really, really admire their work. So it's all, and you know, there's some living artists I kind of like too, but you know, but those are the people I learn. But you know, when growing up, late 50s, early 60s, when I started being cognizant of things, there weren't any art books on any of this stuff. There was certainly no internet. You know, you would get, there was this crazy little magazine called Castle of Frankenstein that had all these pictures of horror movies. And then every once in a while they'd have a picture by, I don't know, Virgil Finlay or one of the pulp illustrators. And you look at it and you go, that's incredible. I want to see more of it. How?
Yeah.
You are 14 years old, you're in Lynchburg, Virginia, there's no museum, there's no art school, there's no internet, there's no books. So all you can do is obsess on one picture for the longest time. I think the first art book I ever bought was Aubrey Beardsley. It came out late 60s, I still have it. And then slowly these books started coming out, and it was because of the technology, the reproduction was never that good. And it's only, it's one of the few things, if you're gonna buy art books, you wanna buy the new ones.
Yeah.
Because the color is way better.
The colors, yeah, and also the dot, even the grain pattern
Yeah.
in the reproduction. I mean, you can drive a truck through a lot of the,
Yes.
the mores and stuff like that, but the new stuff, it's almost like there's no dots at all anymore, you know? But were you familiar with Ivan Bilibin as well?
Oh yeah, they had just imported a lot of those books to stores in New York.
Okay.
I just moved in there and it was
Right.
like, they had
Yeah.
silver ink.
Yeah.
And they were all printed in Russia, so
Yeah.
they're like extravagant, is what they
Right,
were.
exactly,
And it's
yeah.
probably the cheapest books they had.
Right.
But like, oh my God, this guy's incredible.
Yeah, well, but that's always the thing that strikes me as, you know, as fascinating is that when you look at, I was talking about this, I think at art school, when I was teaching, that, you know, you're around artists enough and they'll bring up somebody that, you know, like we may know of a lot of different people, but you may know of like a certain select that I've never heard. And then even though I try to be aware of art, it's like there's always going to be one or two people that you
Right.
like that you don't know. But I find that, you know, so much of like the names that you mentioned, and that there are brilliant people that everybody knows, you know, that like the classics, you know, like the Linedeckers, or you know, or and then there's an entire arena of people who are almost invisible, unfortunately, in a certain kind of
Yeah.
way, and it's almost like, I mean, the breadth and the depth of artistic brilliance out there that these people aren't like better known or whatever. That's always been like kind of almost like quite upsetting to me in a lot of ways. You know, it's like that just to think that these people should have a wider berth. But
Yeah.
you know, that's why I think that this, like the whole thing of here of like defunding the arts and everything is not something that I'm particularly enamored of. You know,
No,
it's like
no.
we need, you know, it's partly if it feels because when I get turned on, like there was one name that you mentioned that I did not ring a bell. So and I'm like, I'll have to ask you the name again of your list of artists. But it's like, you know, that sponge aspect of wanting to know.
So who are yours?
Well, I
Who are
like,
your,
well, I mean,
your
it's,
pantheon?
well, I mean, I do have to admit there was a whole period where I was just, I mean, first it was the comic stuff, because I grew up on a farm, I mean, in New Jersey, so I was, you know, baling hay, and, you know, it's like there was the idea of actually trying to find a place that, yeah. That was kind of like, it just destroyed all the level of intimacy that we were like, you know, just sort of the chilling.
We're
But
getting ready to set a fire right
yeah,
now.
it's
We're gonna
yeah,
gather around
almost
it.
like
It'll
yeah.
be good.
you know, superhero. I mean, there were like the superhero guys, and you know, like it was Carmine Infantino and Kurt Swan, and then you know, eventually Neil, and then the whole comics crew. And then I started going to art school, and that's really when I started becoming aware of illustrators. And that's when I started going to museums. So it was like, even though I looked up art in grammar school and just saw like the wide variety of stuff. I mean, I always, you know, found myself at first being influenced by, you know, of course there's the Michelangelo's because it's like, you know, the figurative stuff. But it was weird because it was hard for me to pin any one thing down. It was like, to me, there was this, I can't say it was anything intentional or anything brilliant. It was like when I talk about when I mean like in an egalitarian sense, it's like just how wide what art could be. It could be, you know, it could be Kandinsky, it could be Mondrian, it could be Van Gogh, you know, it could be, and it was all of these, you know, and like there's a part of me trying to like, wrap my head around Picasso. It's like this is good, and it's like well, they're saying it's good. It's like trying to understand stuff because I knew what made Da Vinci good. I knew it's like I could tell, you know. But for me, like the illustrators that were, you know, popular at the time in like the early, like the 80s and 70s, like the Bob Peaks and Mark Englishes and stuff. But then what I started to do later on was to, as I did with Neil and with other people, it's like is you look at your inspirations and then you go back and find out who inspired them, and then you can find out. Then it's like you're tracing this lineage back to, like, you know, some guy.
There's a guy in a cave
and
putting his hand up there,
or a gal. You know, it's like because I think they were doing some research. They said they weren't sure it was all. A lot of it was male hands. Which is also fascinating.
Nice.
But now, so for me, it's like any, you know, there are technicians. But I find that in terms of art, you know, for me, what I really respond to is somebody with a personal vision. It's like, in a way, showing me something or a perspective I've not seen before because, you know, there's so much out there. It's easy to sort of become sort of, I don't know, complacent or sort of like just, like, not that you've seen it all, but you get very discerning in a way. It's almost like, you know, almost instantaneous. I don't want to waste my time with this. It's like, it's just like there's just something, you know.
It's the work that's been popular. I guess it came from Frazetta, and then all the other people that followed behind him that came from suburbia and were never in fist fights and never did any physical activity were painting, and they couldn't match the emotional capacity that was in Frazetta's pictures, so they were trying to make up for that for being to paint more, render more, and it was almost exclusively for so long and bored me so much. When I see something that's totally rendered, the only thing I can say is, boy, that's a lot of work. But you see something like yours and you can see all the emotion in it and you can share that, and it's a successful painting has to be in collaboration with the viewer, and if you've given them every bit of information, there's nothing for them to do. And I think a successful painting to me has what I call poetic space, and it's work a place where the viewer can start making up the story or help be part of it.
Well, yeah, and I think like you, I think that I like to presume a level of intelligence on the part of my reader or viewer, and also at the same time, it's like I am not interested in handing everything to somebody. There are artists who do it and do it incredibly well, and I can respect it. It's like it may not be my cup of tea, but it sort of feels like that's a lot, you know.
Yeah.
I'm glad your OCD is being put to good use. It's like, you know.
A couple of years ago, I was one of the a guest instructor at this thing called IMC, Illustration Masters class that happens in Amherst, and there's a core group of people, including Boris Viejo and Julie Bell and all that. And I was really happy to learn they were really nice people. That was great.
Yes.
I still don't like their work.
Right.
It's just, there's nothing there for me. But it was great to know, oh, they're really sweet. And there's a whole bunch of people like that. And the thing that was most frustrating to me there was most of the students had to work from a model. And they all brought in these ideas, and I would be suggesting changes and things to do, and they couldn't follow them because they weren't at home and they couldn't get their friends to dress up and then take photographs
Right,
of them,
yes.
and then they could draw
Yes.
from that. And I'm like, so I just set up a drawing board and I drew exactly what I was talking about. And I think I downloaded one picture of a fish because there was one of the things you could do, you had a couple themes, but one was the Lady of the Lake, and I kept going, what if she's standing on thousands of river trout, and they're all there wiggling underneath their feet, and the water's rippling away from that, and she's there, and she's got Excalibur cradled in her arms like it's a baby, and all this stuff, and they couldn't do any of that. So I did it, and I had downloaded one photograph of a river trout, and just started going.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah,
it's like,
you got to nail the fish. If that's the premise, you got to go with. Yeah, and it's like, yeah, absolutely. Well, there is that kind of like what you just said about, and I had this discussion as well. But it's funny that you should mention Vallejo and Frazetta and Julie. It's like, again, I can respect the color sense and
Yes,
and also
color.
and the passion that they bring to it, and it's like and. One of the things for me, for art criticism, if there is any such thing, is to criticize in context. It's like that, and realizing that it's entirely subjective. But it's like, don't criticize oak because it's not pine.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like let oak be oak. It's like like whereas Frazetta, like for me, I want to be able to do tight stuff, but also hopefully have the wisdom or the foresight when to not put it in.
Mm-hmm.
It's like to draw well enough to be able to evoke the emotion, because there are people who can draw and paint rings around me, and it's like, and I feel like the only thing that it really truly is mine is like if I look at somebody and the color feels a certain way, that everything like, no, this person needs to be done in severe, like almost like Franz Klein, block. It's that kind of thing. So, but yeah, I think that there's a movement and a passion, and the unfinished areas of subordination in that musical kind of sense. It like becomes a background thing, whereas everything is sweetened to this like digitized perfection in a lot of what I see in terms of other artists.
I guess it was 60s or 70s, the photorealist school that came in, and I just look at it and go, why in the hell have you spent all that time painting that?
Yeah.
I don't get it.
Yes, right. Exactly. I mean, it's one thing to use photo reference, and that's probably another whole conversation to have. I mean, I'm sure that, we've all, I know I've posed in myself,
Right.
I've been everybody from, from a 5-year-old kid to like an old crone, it's like, or whatever.
Yeah. I have these really, I guess somehow they morphed away from Kaluta's drawers to mine. But I have these photographs of Jeff Jones and Bernie Wrightson and Michael and various other people, and you all dressed up and doing these characters that what painting they came from, usually Jeff's paintings. And it's just, I almost never remember that I have them, and I'll be going through a flat file and go, oh look, oh cool, good for these. But they weren't slavishly copying anything. It was like, here I'm standing here and I've got this, curtain over top of my head, and that's just to see a general idea of what it looked like.
Yeah, the shapes for proportion and shape, and then you can kind of go in there and and nail it all down, because that way it's like it allows, and that's one of the things that I think that if you look at Frank's stuff, you can tell when he used himself for reference.
Yeah.
But so I'm curious. A couple of your pieces, do you use airbrush much, or do you
No.
because some of there was one you had with these streaks of golden light. Did you mall stick it, or just or you alien? You're an alien.
I'm alien.
Yes,
I put my hand up on the wall and I spit on it. No. Because of the inks, the virtue of the inks, you can put a layer down and then put another layer down. It's never going to be flat at first, but if you keep on going on it, and usually I turn it around so I'm especially if it's a blend, so I'll be pulling it from another direction and this.
Right, yeah.
And eventually it sort of looks airbrushed, but
Yeah,
I tried an
okay.
airbrush once and it just drove me crazy. It was
Right.
just too much prep time. I'm like,
Yeah.
no, I just want to get out of the paper.
Yeah, I hear that. Yeah, I'm sort of the inveterate tinkerer. It's like I'm the chemist. Like it's like if I get a pen, like a lot of times I've had to buy 2 of something because I will take the first one apart and figure out ways to sort of like have it do something it's not supposed to, you know.
Right.
And I've ruined quite a few. I've ruined
Yeah.
a number of airbrushes that way. Like if I want to get a certain kind of spatter, or sometimes I would get they have the spatter nozzle. And it's like this is an anemic spatter. It's like so I go in there and I'd like just try to like gouge it so we just and make it like have this
Or the
end,
toothbrush.
you know, yeah.
There was somebody inking for DC Comics, and I read it. This would have been late '60s, and he talked about spattering with a toothbrush for stars in a black sky. Oh, I never thought of that. And you go and do it. Hardly any control, but it's kind of better if there's no
Because
control.
you would also, but it had something to do with the quality of the person putting it down. Because it's like if you make you have to know to make them random. It's like if but otherwise it ends up looking like it looks planned random, which is not random, But I mean the whole idea of just sort of letting the medium speak. I mean, you're mostly on board, right?
Yeah.
Because I mean, I've tried working on every surface. I mean, right now what I do is I work on very thin watercolor paper because if I draw a sketch and then I light box it, because that is the one thing that I like is to actually not have an abraded, like continually erased piece of watercolor paper because it just, even though it may get to that point anyway, at some point, it's like I want to, like.
Well, for all the black and white pieces in this Earthsea book, I did the pencil drawings when I came off doing 3 years of the statue, and I had not drawn maybe 5 or 6 ballpoint pen scribbles in those 3 years. And I went, I wonder what's going to happen. And what happened was, instead of holding my pencil like this, I was holding like this and using my whole arm. And magic. It was magic. It was great. So, now I don't know where I was going, but.
Well, we were talking about changes in style and
Something.
Anybody would
Tinkering?
tinkering?
Earthsea and pencils.
Spattering and destroying
Yeah.
something.
Black and white illustration.
Black and white illustration.
Oh, okay, the black and white illustration. Okay, so I do my sketches on copy paper, 11 by 17, side of my pencil, real loose. And then I went to Office Depot and I bought a pad of 100% rag paper. It's really thin. And I would use the light box and trace off the original drawing, but I was doing it in black Prismacolor pencil. It took this project took 4 years, and the great thing about that was that you could do your drawing and set it aside for 6 months or even a year, and you would know what worked and what didn't, and you could go back and change that, and instead of having that mad rush to get everything done, and then when it's printed, you go, oh God, that's not right.
Right. Yes.
But most all the characters in the book are people of color, and Ursula had written it that way because she was really tired of all these epics with all sorts of white people in them. So my whole thought was, how do I finish rendering them? Because if you do, usually when I do black and white work in a book, it's pen and ink, so that would be cross-hatching, but I didn't want to draw large faces because millions and millions of people have read these books. They know what the characters look like in their mind, and I didn't want to get in the way of that.
Right.
So I wanted to do landscape, smaller figures. A couple of them are medium sized. So I'm like, that would be a black blob, and that wouldn't be very interesting. So finally, when I thought, well, Prismacolor, black Prismacolor will work great, and it was this paper. It's decent enough paper, but it had a texture to it, and I started realizing that if you didn't press down hard and just started dragging your pencil across it, all this texture
Yes,
started happening. It was
I
really,
with black
Yeah.
on watercolor paper and other papers too. And what happens is, it's like, was it Coquille board? Or was like,
Right,
it was some
yeah.
kind of board that was a stipple board.
Yeah.
So it actually starts to break it up, and, you know,
Oh,
and
it's
you
really
work with
cool.
black, so you can
Yeah.
actually shoot it, and it starts to look like, almost like pen and ink in
Mhm.
some
and
ways.
there was all these rock scenes, and it was like, oh, you want rock? This
Yeah,
is
right.
easy to draw rock.
Yeah, right, yeah.
Like, ooh.
Yeah.
So there'd be all these sort of patterns in there, you just sort of look into it and pick the one you wanted to emphasize, and it was, it's, you know, collaborating with your paper.
Now, what would, how did that come about? I mean, do you have, was it something that you would like?
No, it was the publisher. He was Joe Monte, who used to be a buyer for the science fiction, fantasy, and children's book buyer for all of Barnes and Noble. And he was my friend, and then he became my agent, and then he was offered an imprint at Simon & Schuster. And one of the first things he wanted to do was collect all these Le Guin books together, and he wanted me to illustrate it, which was like, oh my God. So it was his ideas, his vision, and then he left Ursula and I completely alone to do the interior. He said, no, marketing and the president and everyone's gonna talk about that cover. I have nothing I can do about that, but you got the interior, just do what you wanna do. So I spent 4 years exchanging thousands of emails with Ursula. She was in her 80s. She's a magnificent writer. I've always loved her work. I've been around her at shows and been too embarrassed to talk to her. Because I'm like, what do I do? Go, you write good?
Yeah, right, yeah.
You know, which you should. You should always do that.
Yes.
It'll make you feel better after they die, that you said that to them. But so we talked on the phone, and then we started exchanging emails, and she had worked with a number of artists, and every one of them had said they'd love to collaborate, and none of them had. They'd all gone off, they'd done their book, and then she saw it, and it wasn't what she wanted. With the whole Marvel method, I knew how great the collaboration was if it worked.
Consequently.
And the other way,
Yes.
But, so I told her I wanted to collaborate. I could tell there was a certain amount of disbelief in her voice when I said that. But after 4 years of all these emails and all this drawing and exchanging various books and thoughts, the fall before she passed away, she sent me a copy of her latest book, and it was personalized to Charles, the best collaborator ever.
That's phenomenal. Yes.
It was really good, and it was like, I was trying to crawl inside of her brain and draw the world. You know, she's been writing these books for 50 years.
Right.
And just show them the way they're supposed to be shown. And it was really
Well,
interesting.
that speaks a lot about empathy in terms, and
Yeah.
also something that I think in terms of artists, what I think is requisite, but also the idea of, I think artists will have an ego, and there could be large egos or small
Mhm.
egos, and then at the same time, it's like when you're telling a story, you want to do your own. Certainly for myself, it's like I want to bring what I can to quote. There's an old expression or a new expression called plussing something, which is when you add to it, try to make it better.
Yeah.
But there are other times, like what you're talking about, where like I certainly have felt like my job here is not to be front and center or to run with it. It's almost like I'm here to honor and sort of do what I can to realize this person, so it's like you say, you're trying to crawl inside, and that's an actual conscious decision in some ways. It's not something that just happens because it's, to me, it's an ultimate sign of respect if you're actually, it's like
well,
I'm
what am
not,
I doing?
it's like
Yes.
it's like I'm like this is about you,
And it was great. And when you work on a long project, this was 4 years, over 4 years of work. There's if you're doing it by yourself, there's always that point where you're like, that'll do.
Oh, yeah.
And then you're sort of sorry for that later on, but you're just damn tired, and you're like,
Yes.
okay. But with this cranky woman in Seattle, there was no that'll do. It's like, now Charles, and she might rattle off some memories she hadn't thought of in 40 years about what you're doing, and you're like, okay, I'm gonna do this. And there were some really funny stories that she told me about various things. It was very, very good experience. And the book, what's really gratifying is that both the book and myself are up for all the major awards
That's
in
great.
that field. So we'll find
Good
out
luck.
if I
Yeah,
win any.
when are the awards?
Well, there's one next weekend, and then there's one somewhere in July. Then I'm going to Dublin to WorldCon, mainly because it's in Dublin.
Right. You go as often as you can. Have you been there?
I've been to Dublin a lot of times, but never to. I go to World Fantasy, which is a different sort of
Okay.
convention, and it's very nice.
Well, you've had a
And,
number of collaborations with Neil as well.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
So, well, of course, obviously Stardust, but are you working? No, what have you got coming up now? I mean, are you working on your own stuff
well,
right now?
I have a novel that I've written. I have a graphic novel that I'm working on, which is drawn in
For whom? For whomever.
for
Okay.
whoever, whenever I get it done, I'll
Right,
write
okay,
that.
got it, okay.
But it's drawn in it's anthropomorphic animals, and it's based on the Appalachian jacktails. And then I have a middle grade novel that I've been working on for a bunch of years that uses text and graphic narrative and illustration all to tell the story, just back and forth, whatever works. Because you do these graphic novels, and there's sections that you're going, why the hell am I drawing this?
Yeah.
It's two people at a table and they're talking,
Yeah,
and you've
exactly.
got to like really go crazy to make it interesting. I went, well, then that's text.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
do that. And so those are interesting. But what I really physically have under contract is I'm doing an Art of Stardust book that's going to reproduce pictures lots better, and with a lot of new work and various things and commentary through Titan. And then I'm doing a book. There's a woman writer named Joanne Harris that wrote Chocolat and The Gospel of Loki and all these kinds of books. And she's written a book of new fairy tales, and I'm doing 13 color plates and 25 black and whites for that book. And that's through Orion, who's UK, and probably through Saga here in the United States.
So you can tell Charles needs work, so it's like he's struggling.
Yes, still, after all these years.
That sounds fantastic.
Do we have any time?
When is Stardust supposed to be out? The
Yes.
art of-
Next year.
That's great.
So
Size format, and that's all.
it should be 9 by 12. It's,
Okay.
an art book, so
Right.
it should be nice and big.
Oh no, I think 12 should be the short side.
Okay,
It's
well,
like-
you talked to Titan about
Well,
that.
well, yeah, Nick. Okay, it's like Nick. Remember us? But yeah.
There's pictures. Yeah.
But an art book for me, this is just selfishly, I sort of feel like 9 by 12 is the barest minimum. I think for Stardust, because again, I look at that like the room with the landscape that the story you were in. It's like
You wanted 15 by 20.
it's
150.
let's do a let's do something that you can go into, because that's one thing that your work demands. It's like you are, as a viewer, you are in there. It's like, the only other person I've ever felt this way with is that when I would go and I would see an exhibit of his work that I wanted to literally climb, I could go there and stay there for a while, is Maxfield Parrish. So it's like, that's what I feel like,
Okay.
what you're doing. So just tell Nick, it's like, Nick,
Bigger,
just
bigger.
to say, Bill said this, and it's like, and Nick will be fine.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think are we?
We're sort of technically out of time. We've got the room for a little bit longer, so if you guys can spare
Do
a
you have
couple
any
more minutes away
questions?
from your
Questions?
tables.
And I'm sorry if I just kept pestering you with questions.
It's fine, I know, whatever. Yeah, it's fine.
All right.
Do you,
Anybody?
anyone have any questions? Or anything?
The room you painted looked like the story read from right to left instead of left to right.
Yep,
Was
it
that-
did. We
was that-
locked one door, so they couldn't come in. It's only through that door, yep. And I'm not quite sure why I did that anymore. It's been a couple of years. But it was when I was transposing that to book form, and it was gonna go left to right, I had to rethink a lot of stuff. And it was really, you know, like, can't you just flop that? No, you can't. But it confused some people. They would try to start at the end of the story.
So they read it and they had to,
Yeah, you have to go around, but I had these drapes and paintings just hanging down, and then this rear screen projection, a retrospective of all my art and stuff in
Nice.
this, so you could just stand over it. It was really fun.
Very cool.
Anybody else?
What are you working on these days, Bill?
Well, actually, I'm working on a series called Parisian White with Kelly Sue DeConnick. It's a 1920s sort of Moulin Rouge, Josephine Baker kind of, time period, like one of my favorite time periods. But it's got holograms, so it's sort of like Blade Runner, should be like, you know. And just wrapping up the first volume of. There's a publisher that works with the Museum of Modern Art in New York that's doing my art books finally, getting them. So actually Neil's doing the forward for it, which I'm really excited about. So
Well, he's doing one for the Stardust book.
Oh, is he?
Hey, we could have dueling.
Well, the fact that I think
But he has to
we-
write them.
Well, I was going to say we can both take pleasure. Says like Neil has intent. He's told me it's like he's told both of us.
Yeah.
And now it's like we just sit back and
And wait.
and
5 or
it's
6
like
years.
okay, are you still promoting Good Omens? It's like yeah. But and then I'm having some conversation. Well, there's a book that I just did. I mean, a steel book cover for the Dark Phoenix movie that came out, and I finished up a bunch of stuff for the Legion premiere, like the show that. Damn this thing. And maybe doing. Right now, I'm in conversations to do some big production stuff for the new Spider-Verse movie as well. So I'm excited about that. And I'm also drawing and painting. I did Seth MacFarlane. I don't know if you're familiar with Seth MacFarlane, Family Guy. I did his album cover, and so he called me right before I left to ask if I could do a portrait of his. So I'm doing a horse painting for his. So there's, I think, and then this is all in advance of like San Diego. So it's like, so what am I working on? It's like I need work too. It's like please help. It's like I have nothing on my plate.
I just finished up a commission, and I spent years trying to figure out how to do commissions. Because I used to say, well, they would tell me what they want, and you give them a price, and then you get it done, and it was worth way more than that price was, and painting would go away, you didn't see it anymore. And all these things. So the last couple of years, what I do is, there's a picture I'd like to draw or paint, and I don't have the time to do it, so you're paying me to give me the time to do it, and you will get a really nice painting. And they don't have any say so.
I love that. That's actually pretty cool. Well, I would do the thing when you talk about doing a piece for a certain amount of set money. It's like I had learned over time to make this sort of like this conditional thing. And said, I'll do the piece for this much. However, there are times when I get into a piece and it just runs away, and I'm like, I'm in that zone and everything else, and I'll go, there's no way I can let this be. I said, I will assess what I feel I'd like for it, and I will offer it to you first. You can either say, that's ridiculous, I want no part of it. It's like, in which case I will put the piece aside, I will do you that piece. I'll just, right then and there, it's like I will do, it will be an okay piece, but it won't be the one that I just sort of threw everything into. And there are many occasions where they would go, well, he really put a lot into that. It's like, so they kind of, but it's not any kind of contrived sort of like, mercenary thing. It's almost like, wow, I really, like, I got into that. That really snuck up on me, It's like.
I know there's some people, some artists I know that can, you're giving me $500, so they do a $500 painting, or are you giving me $1,000, they do a $1,000 painting. I'm like, I just do paintings.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't, when I start working, it's like, there's nothing
it's like
practical
that,
involved.
there's no meter inside that goes ding, it's okay, it's like mid-stroke.
I wrote this Prince Valiant miniseries for Marvel years ago, and John Ridgway begged me to do English artist, fairly traditional English artist, and he begged me to do the interior, so, okay, let's go. But he also he had to afford his house, he had to do so many pages per week, and so that's what he did. And sometimes the backgrounds went away, or he had that meter running in his head.
Wow, interesting.
And how the hell can you do that? I don't know.
I literally, I can't. It's like it's caused no end of difficulty.
Yeah, yes,
No,
yes.
but, yeah, so, any other questions?
I think we have one more.
Yeah.
Yeah, when you get into a piece or whatever, what are the quintessential kind of stuff that you know you're gonna need to start with, or, I don't know, like, what is your process when you begin some sort of painting or drawing or whatever? Maybe that's too big, I don't know.
Well, for me, I mean, it's like, I think when you mentioned about the whole thing about getting into the zone, it's like in terms of extrapolating or interpreting your question, it's like what we need to get into is what I have around me in terms of reference or the media I'm comfortable with, or if I'm choosing to do something media I'm not as familiar with, it's still, at that point, it's like throwing curveballs into it. We want a certain amount of control, but also there's gonna be things that are gonna happen. Any work with a piece, like when you look at a finished piece, you're seeing the result of every stroke. And remember that any artist will cover every square millimeter of that. So at any point, when they're into like that brush stroke, sometimes the mind might be turned off. Other time it's almost like, well, this is a kind of interesting lozenge of shape here. So you're running with it, and and it's really a dialogue. So in terms of what helps to get into that zone is just to have everything sort of in place, and then you're just in it, and it's like running. It's like you're no longer thinking about
Music is good. Playing some kind of music in the studio really helps.
Yeah, really. And certain music, I find for me, if I'm listening to certain music, it's not a lot of like heavy sort of like hip hop or anything like that for certain things. And sometimes it's almost Celtic or orchestral stuff that has a motif that keeps returning. So it's like if I go into the zone, it's almost like this sort of like very slow rolling of waves on a beach of creativity.
I'm very still backwards, and I still have a CD player that has 5 discs, and that's what I put on.
I was gonna say, it's like, at what point does that does that tip into the Luddite category?
Almost,
by modern
almost.
terms, yes, right.
But I'll put, in the morning, put 5 CDs in, and it starts playing, and I might hear one tune out of the CD because I'm working. And if my wife comes in and she's doing some work in the studio, at some point there's going to be, Charles, can we change the music? I'm like, sure. I haven't heard it. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's probably played through 2 or 3 times.
Right.
And she's like, I'm really tired of hearing that song.
Yeah, right, yes.
So,
Oh, boy, do I know that.
Yes.
Yeah. So, all right.
Okay.
I think
I think,
got it.
Well, thanks for coming, everybody.
Thanks.